informed my fiancé that I didn't want children from day one, after which his sister gave birth, and he changed his name to Mama and his phone's background to me while holding the "I left, darling," because I've always knew I didn't want children. At an early age, even when individuals inquired about the number of children I desired, but my response was always no. Didn't even understand the meaning of child-free. However, as I grew older, I understood what it was, but I didn't feel that supposedly unconditional love to accompany having kids. May I? What if I can't be a mother but still adore a child? Because I'm not sure what that kind of I feel like. I've spent my life in love. My whole life till I met my fiancé, 34M2. He was everything to me years ago, and I at last fell in love romantically, although, regarding children, I was nonetheless aware that couldn't do it right now, I said, telling him that having children was not an option. He said that he was okay with it because he didn't really like children, so it wasn't an issue for him. And 5 months ago, he suggested and I acknowledged that we had moved in together. Everything went as planned. Our wedding proceeded calmly. There was no haste. Until 2 months after his sister's baby was born, my fiancé fell in love right away, beside his nephew, and was there at every turn. He was altered by the manner he showered. I suppose it felt usual to snooze alongside him. Thus, I didn't mind when we went 3 weeks ago to. My fiancé is having lunch at his sister's place. Was cutting her grass when she requested that I observe the infant for a few minutes. Attempted to decline, but she seemed so depressed. Something I agreed with, believing she would just place him in a stroller or something. However, after placing him in my arms, she departed. I worried upstairs since I had never held such a little infant before, and I'm afraid I could leave him 5 minutes in. At first it was okay until he began sobbing, but at the top he began to yell. Of his lungs, how could a baby so little be so loud that I almost started crying? As softly as possible, I got up and went. I shouted at my fiancé outside where she was. He came to pick up the baby for me. Captured a photo of me holding the infant. And rather than taking him away from me, he began offering me advice on how to relax. He moved the infant closer to me by pushing him down. Remarked, "He really suits you," to my chest. Was about to have a panic attack. With my hands shaking, I felt even more terrified. I shouted to drop him. "If you don't grab, I'm going to put him on the ground." Became irate, yelled at me, and seized I couldn't take it any longer, sweetie. So he arrived home about the time I grabbed an Uber, took a shower at midnight, and went to bed. The next morning, he was on the sofa. Gone by the time I woke up, and he didn't get home until 3 a.m, I informed. We needed to speak, but he just said, "Tomorrow," before returning to the sofa. When I got home from work the next day, he waited for me, and once we sat down, he expressed regret for his reaction, stating that I questioned, not knowing what had gotten into him. I already knew the answer to the question. Asked me, "Are you interested in having children right now?" I'm not sure, but I just adore him. Know me well, isn't it typical of him? I suppose. But do you really feel that way? Opposed to having children that you don't even have? In order to conceive or give birth, I discussed how frightening pregnancy may be, and birth were particularly for me, given how difficult it was for my mother. She almost passed away while giving birth to me because to issues, and she needed to have, and having an emergency hysterectomy isn't the only explanation. And you are aware of that. My feelings about my uncertainty about my ability to absolutely love a child, I know, but you can learn to love me properly. Listen, we don't have to adore a kid. We can now get married if we agree on this. First, then, go over it again. Please don't turn it off right away. Then he began to hold me and weep, so I let it drop, but I knew in my heart that I couldn't be a mother. Understand myself, and to be honest, I felt deceived. I believed that with him, I would ultimately begin. I was angry with him, but I believed we could. After this, he began performing some He changed his wallpaper, which is unusual. Add the photo of me with the infant. He began referring to me as Mama because he wanted to begin engaging in unprotected intercourse, and he even, when he thought, he started to touch my belly. I had reproductive problems, and I was sleeping. I've never given such treatment because my menstruation is sporadic at the moment, but generally painless, so I didn't bother to take any action, but when he recommended that I see the doctor to see what's happening, I became anxious. He seemed to be attempting to get me abortion, and pregnancy are still prohibited. I left the nation where we now reside. I informed him about my mother's shower fall, and I wanted to remain after she fractured her leg by lying with her for a few days, he assured her that everything was well. And I then waited for him to go for work. I took some crucial paperwork, clothing, precious items, and myself and my dog. I'm not sure whether what I did was... Yes, I'm beginning to question myself. Perhaps all he wanted was for me to be healthy, was just holding me, or enjoyed that image, but I can't get the sensation out of my head that there was an issue. But he hasn't understood I was gone and would never return. He just asked me why I took the jokingly. I kept it a secret from everyone. I told my mother that I missed her. Maybe I should return and act as if nothing is wrong. However, there's something strange about him now. I just don't know anymore. I apologize if this is widespread, and really I just can't speak to anybody for a long time regarding this, and it's probably killing me. I apologize for leaving certain things out of context. Regarding that, as well as comments where the OP has responded to the first commenter, I believe you are proper to go as you're obviously on many pages pertaining to children. Forcing you to become a mother is careless, dishonest, and not the foundations upon which you want to construct a marriage on, but I do believe you should own your choice to go and share your fiancé that it's over rather than running away. Oop, you're most likely correct. Yet I always flee because I can't bear it. Conflict. I flee rather than relocating like a typical person when I was 18. Does the fiancé know where he went? Had happily gone to Oop, although he was never in. He has quite high standards in my own country. Work. So he never even takes time off. He has almost little chance of finding. Even if he makes an effort, I'm not even in the capital or close to one or two of their comments. We may marry first, then come back. He intends to make it more difficult for you to tell him that you're adamant about saying no. My stepmother didn't love me, kids, wholeheartedly, and it even made me happy. If you were a decent mother, it would be wonderful that he made you maintain cradling his sister as well. Oops. She is a single sister, so you can't blame her. Mom handles everything by herself. There were some complications with her delivery, and she really is updating as best she can. February 11th, 2025. Thus, I will attempt to make this as precise as possible in terms of time and succinct as possible if things are confusing, but I'll explain in the comments. My first action after my last article was get a pregnancy test by blood. And it was adverse that evening. I also spoke to I didn't feel comfortable telling you everything, Mom, every detail. Thus, I omitted a few things. However, she informed me that she believes in me, and that I may remain with her for whatever long I necessity. I spoke with my sisters as well. Acknowledged that they didn't enjoy the thought of me dating a somewhat older person, yet they didn't want to press me as they are aware of if they did, I would most likely get irate. Separate myself and become even more reliant on him. I expressed regret for overreacting in any situation and confident, and they should never be reluctant to. Let me know if anything seems strange or incorrect. I gave my employer a call and a more wholesome variant of the narrative. He was furious. Not just with him, but also with myself. He's like my work dad, therefore I should inform him sooner, and was the one who asked me to accompany him. He said he didn't take me to a foreign country, nation with no intention of caring. He said he would pull some strings for me, help get me a job in the workplace in my nation, as my previous role was been filled. and he informed me that if I wanted to return my belongings so I could go return on a Saturday, and he'd join me after giving it some thought. Opted to return, which may seem absurd. Yet my K-pop purchases had cost me a lot of money, mangas, picture cards, and albums, and I didn't want to begin my collection from the beginning. I thus spent a few days with pals, and recognizing how lonely it feels when visiting relatives, and I felt alone in an unfamiliar land, despite the fact that it is not that far from home. I was aware that I could never abandon my family. Like it once again, even my dog seemed more content to spend each afternoon hugging my mother. I also went to see I've always detested my father's grave, cemetery, and stayed away from them. But I went alone with him at that time, and brought fresh flowers that have been lightly washed, and simply I told him none, while I sat there conversing with him. What would have occurred if he hadn't died? I sobbed a lot at the time. I ended up laughing like a crazy person, there for perhaps 3 hours, but it seemed so I also visited my mom's place for healing. According to the doctor, it was obtaining a tubal ligation is feasible, particularly in light of my health concerns. She informed me that it may take around 6 months, but I didn't mind waiting, so I felt liberated as soon as we began the procedure. After that appointment, and a lot more, I didn't even consider how much happy I was at home. About my ex till he sent me a message requesting I informed him about my mother's actions. Better, and I'll return on Saturday. I made the decision to speak with him directly, since I was already returning to get my belongings on Friday afternoon. I drove back after my sister let me use her vehicle. The travel is about 12 hours, but with breaks, I went for around 14 hours, directly to the home of my employer, and when I came at around 9 a.m., and he requested me to meet him and his family for breakfast. He then accompanied me, along with his kid, to assist with packing my belongings at my ex's place. Even some of my favorite plants are sent to me. They ridiculed my musical preferences, and in just an hour and a half we were done. I then visited my ex's sister's home. I had to find out whether the whole infant I realized that the event had been a setup. Wasn't at the office on Saturdays, so I visited. Fortunately, she was at home and welcomed me inside, and we sat in uncomfortable quiet. Briefly before I questioned her. Did your brother has asked you to keep the baby? What? No. Why, even? Occurred when I walked downstairs that day. He stated you received it even if you weren't there. What did he do when he was ill and had to leave me? Give you the specifics of what he stated. You had a panic attack brought on by problems with fertility and cradling. The infant was making me said to him that you didn't sound like that. But how are you supposed to know? He said, more than I do about my fiancé. Then he left me with the truth about her. Yes, he even said, you wanted to go and watch the kids, visiting the park with the infant as a pair, but I informed him that he was insane if he believed that I would allow him to exploit my child as it. He became angry with me and remained silent. To me for a few days, after which I chuckled and clarified what was really occurred. She became so enraged that she began to weep, and she expressed regret for leaving the infant with me, and I expressed regret for stating that I would put the infant on the ground explains that I wasn't going to do that in reality. She said that she was really thinking about attending. Little interaction with him due of his. She dreaded his weird conduct. May harm the child, I concluded. To inform her that I would be leaving her brother, and she acknowledged that we had given her a hug. And she stated she would miss me when I returned. To wait for my ex at my boss's residence. I instructed him to contact me when he got home. When I left work, I felt really anxious. I almost puked, but my boss's wife forced me to tea with chamomile and remained at my side. I really like it when you stroke my back. My boss is the lady in the whole family, and I accompanied his kid to his one thing about my employer is that although he is delicate, he is enormous. 195 centimeters, 6'3" in and around 286 pounds, 130 kilos. and his kid is essentially a perfect replica of him. So I felt quite secure when my ex returned home, grinned at me before seeing my supervisor, and he asked me what was happening with his kid. Me. I'm ending our relationship because you're clearly experiencing a period of baby fever, and I don't want anything to do with that. Guy, what do you mean that we can't split up? We love each other, therefore we should split up. I like the thought of being pregnant with your child, and that will not. He attempted to embrace me, but my boss. Why don't you? She replied, grabbing his shoulder. You join me here? I can't lose him. You are my soulmate, and I adore you. If you leave me, I can't survive without you. When I die, I would want not to have children. I'll even get a vasectomy if I lose you. Please remain, however, since our families will believe that you can't just cut off the involvement such as this one. First and foremost, calm down. This isn't a telenovela. Second, I didn't even inform my relatives that we were engaged, and I've informed them of this previously. What about the dog you had when we split up with him? What dog is it? I can't simply take her. I've kept that dog since I was 17 years old, because believe me, she hardly tolerates you. She is much happy with my mother. Began crying and attempting to talk, but I, unable to comprehend my boss's kid, couldn't decide when to laugh the most, and inquired, You really didn't disclose your relatives? Me, I just never discovered the perfect time, you know. My ex-partner soothed down a little and said that he would never let me too. He continued to adore me, blah blah blah. Felt rather intimidated when he stated I'll track you down and make, I said, you fall in love with me again. Good luck with that, but really, he said, we're not enough in a telenovela with the drama. I returned the ring to him and he hurled it at me, but I wasn't struck. I hope you find someone who wants to do this, children, but I also hope that you psychiatric assistants. We then departed, and I spent the evening spent at my boss's home, and I returned home the next morning and spent napping for the remainder of Sunday because I had a little fever, which is me, the girl, who suffers from emotional fevers. I assisted my mom's business today, along with the 13th is the day of the treatment session, because I'll begin with how things went at the workplace. They sort of fired me again in March till I was rehired. I appreciate your assistance. I can understand how absurd this whole thing is. I feel so joyful and light right now. I've forgotten how much I cherish my family. I probably won't be updating again, unless something extraordinary occurs, but many thanks, particularly to the ladies of Reddit Update, to make a few things clearer statements made by certain individuals, and even told me via messaging that I've never loved I'm a terrible, cold person, and so is my fiancé. Did, and I believe I still do, love him. Knew the whole passage by heart to speak to. He wants to talk to him about his sister's kid. I fled because of unprotected sex, although I frightened, losing all memory, and choose to be straightforward and upfront. Didn't ridicule him with 2 males. When I ended our relationship, that's really crazy, and they accompany me as I didn't feel secure with my former partner. People claiming to be alone and in need of treatment, I'm aware that I have previously scheduled the appointment. Regarding the tublation on the 13th, it's not yet confirmed, but I'll attempt to have someone do a bilateral scalp injection. Actually, let me know what it was right here. I desired to get a hysterectomy, however that's essentially impossible, in my opinion. Doctor, I heard these noises from several folks. I wish it were phony, but it may be genuine. I used this wording since English is. Although it's not my first language, there is that second story next. Mom won a lot of money and allowed her to. Boyfriend stayed at my residence after her passed away from cancer, but 4 years later, my girlfriend, ordered me to leave, saying, when I was 17, my mother owned the home. Came into money and made an effort to hold on to it. Silent. But she settled my father's obligations, paid her back and purchased him a tiny home, bills, and covered my sister's university expenses, and established money for me. She had a romantic partner at the moment, and soon after, he and his 7-year-old kid moved in too. Throughout the next several years at our new home my mother purchased, a home for my sister when she graduated from college, and lived with her boyfriend with us without making any payments. But he worked when my mother was diagnosed when I was 21. It wasn't good that she sat me with cancer, and my sister went over everything in detail. The amount of money she planned to provide me and myself her existing home, and my sister had a substantial amount left over. She concluded by asking whether I would permit her partner to remain in the home with his kid until he had a house of his own. I agreed. She told her before she passed away. He would have to find his lover. Own home, but had more time to save for the trip during the last 4 years. He has remained living at the home with I haven't objected to his kid because I pay all the expenses, all right? But he does purchase food for him and his child. Intermittently dated and mostly maintained the ladies from this home, which I admired him up till his present partner who has spent 3 nights at my residence. Sometimes, and initially, apart from feeling a bit awkward, but I was okay with her. This past weekend was the time at which I stopped making I had some lunch when she arrived on foot. She picked up a dish and headed downstairs. I asked her to get food out of my pan, what she believed she was doing. She began advising me on how to search for leeching off and finding another place to reside. The connection my deceased mother had as in. The adult was pitiful, and I yelled for my mom's ex-boyfriend drop by, and I informed him I had no idea what he was doing. But I decided not to be. He wouldn't be treated with contempt in my home. Barely meet my eyes as he spoke, I said that my mother had promised him the residence, and he was only being kind by allowing it's not at all true that I stay first. He and I were gathered by Mom after she requested that he remain to establish anticipation. My mother soon met him before she informed him that she had won the money. Girls she wasn't planning on. She did. Put money away for him, but money for his son's college education when he arrives. But he is unable to touch it. He has resided in this residence with his kid, almost 8 years without making any payments. He ought to be wealthy. And if that's his fault, right? I told him I had 30 days to escape, and I wasn't going home. Someone who would be dishonest and rude to me. That evening, he departed my home with his son, but his former spouse contacted to inform me that I'm a mean and rude son who's losing his. He visits my place every other week. I feel as if my mother wasn't expecting to remain here, but my sister said she believes I'm not keeping my word. To my mother, which gave me the impression that perhaps I will be the February update. I would want to take a minute on January 1st, 2025, to discuss a few points I saw in the remark. 1. Trusts have been established, and neither my sister nor I have full access to the we lost money as a result of this because I was in my early 20s, and so was my sister. When my mother passed away, she wanted to create yes. We did have some consistency prior to access, and to keep us safe from those who could attempt to exploit. Particularly, when we were mourning, I had an attorney. He has previously told me, what are the legal eviction laws in my area? And the ex-boyfriend of my mom will get official eviction documents, only for my own protection, even beyond today. So my dad walked over to the update and made the decision to avoid inviting my guy over since he is unaware of the financial aspect. And I didn't intend to date the guy. The circumstances this morning, and brought with my cousin to make it easy to tell I'm planning to give Mom's ex-boyfriend a call. Chuck arrived at about 10 in the morning. Moment and spoke with my father before inquiring whether he may be left alone for a few minutes. Dad nodded with me, so my cousin and he into the kitchen, where Chuck and I were. To be honest, I sat in the living room and didn't think things would go as planned, but I'm delighted it did. Chuck began by saying, "Sorry, I can't recall everything." He spoke, but he missed the fundamentals. Although he has been lonely, my mom is not alone. He apologized, thanks to me and his kid. due to the fact that he was apprehended enamored and allowed another person to occupy his plenty with ideas, and that he acknowledged his errors and ought never to have placed with someone who would treat me disrespectfully. Per my mother's recollection, he attempted to give me a cashier's check for... He said that $15,000 wasn't much, yet he wanted me to understand how much he valued me and living with me, and that he wanted payment return a portion of what he owed me. But I declined the check both. Partially, since I've never wanted his money, but I'm not interested in to provide him with any potential legal defense to stand on if I'm in any way. I told him the first portion while attempting to remain, and instructed him to point it toward a residence. He revealed to me that he lives with his sister, but intends to examine homes within next week. The realtor said that his kid is inquiring about our next get-together and said that my sister and I are both welcome. To schedule a meeting with him after all of that, my dad and his cousin assisted. Him in obtaining anything he took out of the home brought a U-Haul with him, and he returned my home keys and expressed regret. Once more and departed, which was unexpected, but I feel a lot better now that things went so smoothly. Update 2. Less like I let my mom down. February 11th, 2025 is most likely will be my last update until something unexpected occurs. Yet I wanted to provide a little update. On Chuck, so last week Chuck gave me a call. Then he made another offer yesterday on a home, and they were approved yesterday. Early next month is the anticipated closure date. However, I know that I am very proud of him. Everyone anticipated more drama. And to be honest, a few of the remarks made me concerned, but he says it's been great. Expressed gratitude to me for granting him such, spent a lot of time here and gave me some cash. More time for his visit, which I rejected once again, although I did offer assistance. When the time comes, he will move in. He put down about half for a down, which is terrible. Payment, therefore he was undoubtedly saving money when he was here, and I'm happy. Everything that took place was in support for him to move into a house on his own. Yesterday, I spoke with his son. When he leaves school, we're going to spend this weekend playing laser tag with he and his sister. Are thrilled about the new home as well.